Dos, Niyakit. Hello, good morning. Welcome to the Arapaho Productions podcast. Today we have a special guest with us, Dr. Natalie Youngbull. So I want to preface this episode by saying that for the month of March, it is Women's History Month. So for this month, our department, along with Arapaho Productions, we will drop several podcasts that focus on women, different topics, but specifically talking about their experiences as Arapaho women or Indigenous women in the fields that they work in. So it is an honor today to have Dr. Natalie Youngbull with us. And I also want to say that, share with everyone that Natalie and I went to elementary, middle school together. We went to Darlington schools from kindergarten to 8th grade. Then we went to Calumet Public Schools. From freshman to high school, both graduated from there. And Natalie was our salutatorian at Calumet. Natalie has always been smart. She's always been intelligent, the top of our class. She's always been a good person, an athlete. And just to be able to be in this space together now, because we kind of had a rough upbringing and, to be able to be here and share this space together as colleagues, and we're cousins, and we have kind of in the same circle sometimes. So I'm just really grateful to her and her leadership, her mentorship of what she's doing. And she's a professor at the University of Oklahoma. So let Natalie introduce herself. Go ahead. Welcome.
Thank you so much. And is it okay if I call you
Yes.
KK?
Yes.
All right. Saying Carrie is just too formal sometimes.
Yes.
Shbivat Stillwolms, Natalie Youngbull Nahishbe. Growing up in El Reno, I think I was born here in Oklahoma, but then my first memories are up in Montana on my mom's reservation. So we did move around a little bit whenever I was, younger, but then, when I got to kindergarten age, then we moved back. And so it's kind of like perfect timing, because then I was able to matriculate into Darlington, and start from there and go K through 8, and all of that. So,
right. Yeah. Okay, let me go ahead and give you the formal biography of Dr. Natalie Youngbull. So she is a citizen of the Arapaho tribes of Oklahoma, descendant of the Fort Peck, Assiniboine, and Sioux tribes of Montana. She is an assistant professor of adult and higher education in the Educational Leadership and Policy Studies Department at the University of Oklahoma. Her research interests include the experiences of American Indian Gates Millennium Scholars, Native Indigenous student success, Native nation building, and intellectual leadership and capacity building within tribal colleges and universities. She serves as an editor of the Tribal College and University Research Journal, the first peer-reviewed journal focused on research based at TCUs. Youngbull received her Bachelor of Arts degree in psychology from OU, a Master of Education and doctoral degrees in higher education at the University of Arizona. She is excited to be a part of the Indigenous higher education initiatives with the College of Education at OU. So, and just to put it all together, she's really smart and she's really bougie. She does a lot of things. So if you can kind of just tell us, what was your dissertation in, and why did you choose to pursue a PhD?
Yeah. I think it all kind of connects. When I was coming out of high school, there was a scholarship program that was created called the Gates Millennium Scholarship Program. And this was funded by Bill and Melinda Gates, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, a pledge of, I think it was $1.6 billion to fund 20,000 scholars in 20 years. And there was, of those scholars, 1,000 scholars awarded every year. And out of those 1,000, there was 4 cohorts of students, one of them being American Indian or Alaska Native, and 150 of those 1,000 scholarships every year went to students that were from that background. And so I, was told about it, and I applied. It was a very intensive application process, I remember. But the understanding was that it was a full ride. So I applied and I was awarded the scholarship. And so my understanding was that I had my college, my undergraduate paid for, right? Decided to go to OU. And when I was there, I got involved and on the student engagement side, and really fell in love with working with Native students. And I love the college atmosphere. And I majored in psychology because I thought, well, maybe school counseling or something like that, right? As a career. And then along the way, I found out that there was like an actual degree program that I could pursue in student affairs and work with Native students in higher education. So I decided to go that route, and along the way found out that my scholarship would cover graduate school in 7 particular areas, education being one of them. So I knew I had the funding. And so I thought, okay, well then, what's another 2 years in school basically to get the master's degree?
Right.
I kind of just stumbled upon the University of Arizona. Honestly, I had never been out to Tucson, never visited. But I did have family in like that Mesa, Scottsdale area. And so I thought, just apply and see what happens. I got accepted. Then I didn't know whether to stay in Oklahoma or go to Arizona. And my grandma told me that I needed to go. And so that made the decision for me.
Right.
And the program at the University of Arizona just turned out to be such an amazing program for me. The faculty, all of the faculty were so supportive of me. I had a really good experience.
Right.
And they encouraged me. They're the ones that planted the seed for me to think about pursuing a PhD. I had no clue what that meant. But I thought, if they could see that potential in me, they're the experts. They would know.
Right.
And I knew I had the funding. That was also another big factor in all of this, is that I had the scholarship funding to cover my schooling, and I didn't have to go into such debt.
Right.
And so I decided to pursue the PhD. And at the time too, there's other factors that play into it, like the economy really took a hit back in 2008, and several jobs were cut across the campus of the University of Arizona, and I was working on campus, and my position got cut. So the decision was either to return back to or to go to pursue the PhD in the fall, or to find another job, basically.
Yeah.
And I knew that if I had moved away from Tucson at that time, I probably wouldn't have pursued a PhD because, one, I wouldn't have the funding anymore. There was, like time constraints on the funding. But also I just didn't think that I would find another program that was so supportive and perfect for me.
Right.
So I just took the leap of faith and I just continued on, and was, because it wasn't anything new to me. Like I got comfortable there. Yeah. Yes. And I had that support, and my advisor, was the same advisor that I had throughout my master's. And she really, really played a key role in my success. Right. I was always so grateful for her. She's non-Indigenous or non-Native, but she's Korean American and just so supportive, and took the time to get to know me and understand me without me having to explain who I was to her. Right. And I truly appreciated that about her.
And why is an advisor important? Why do they play a big role in your journey or what program you pursue? Why? Explain to listeners why that's important.
Yeah,
or why that makes a difference.
Yeah, so they can serve. They're kind of like mentors, right? That particular person on campus that can you can go to and you can ask your questions, seek that guidance. And they're the ones that really kind of that play a real pivotal role in the development of your scholarly activity, or how you're really approaching research and thinking about it. typically, you are paired with someone who you have similar research interest in.
Yes.
And that can be, it doesn't have to be very specific. Like for me, I was interested in researching American Indian students in higher education. That's kind of broad, but not really that broad.
Right.
And she didn't do research in that space, but she did do research on student success. And so that's kind of where we overlapped.
Okay.
But along the way, as well, being a good mentor, I feel like she took the time to get to know me, but also to be open to learning from me about American Indian students' experiences.
Right.
And I think that's one of the key factors that makes it a good mentor, is that they're willing to learn from you, and they don't act like they know
everything.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Because how many Indigenous students are in higher education right now? Do you know that statistic?
You know what? What I do know is that there's less and less every year. There's been a decline in the enrollment of American Indian students in higher education over the last 20 years, is what I've heard.
Okay.
A steady decline. And so, that's something that's alarming,
right,
to hear. And then, but within the last, I would say 10 to 15 years, there's been this small movement of American Indian scholars in the space of higher education, and I'm one of them. And I found my way there, but then I also found that community, and they really supported me as well.
Right. So before we go any further, I want to share this that I had pulled from NCS, which is National Center for Education Statistics. In 2021, there were 56% were full-time and 44% were part-time faculty. So faculty means professors, associate professors, assistant professors, instructors, lecturers, assisting professors, adjunct professors, and interim professors. So when you look at the 1.5 million faculty that make up the higher education, less than 0.5% were American Indian and Alaska Native. So that's just showing you how rare what Natalie in this field that she's in, the space that she's in, how rare it is to even just have an Indigenous person there. In addition, an Indigenous female, they didn't provide that statistic, but we don't have a lot of people in these spaces. And so I know we're going to get to the PhD, but that's a whole topic in itself. But why was it important for you? What you said, it's all connected, right? Of why did you think it was important to be at a higher education institution, and you as an Indigenous female being a professor, why did you think that was important to go into that field?
That's a really good question. I don't think I've really thought of it in that way. When I decided to pursue the PhD, I remember having a process like me being in higher education, being in academia, and the decision from going from the master's to the PhD, that's a real big, that's a jump, right? Because for the master's, much of it is more based in that praxis, or, it's very applicable.
Right. And tell them what praxis means.
It's kind of like, the act of doing, right? So what you're learning about, and then you're able to go and apply it directly to your job or what you're actually doing, right? Whereas with a PhD, it's theory based, right? It's more theoretical. So and then it's research based too, right? You may do some research in your master's, or you may learn about that, right? But you're not really engaging in it,
right?
In the PhD, that's the shift, right? And so when I came into my master's, I remember I was so naive. I didn't know. I kind of had been I don't know, somewhat trained to know what kind of questions to ask. And one of them was to ask about if there was graduate assistantships, and that was mainly just for additional funding, right? Whatever kind of work you could do. And it's either 10 hours a week, maybe 20 hours a week, right?
But you're working
So,
there on campus
yeah.
in the department, maybe somewhere where you're not having to leave campus. You're a student and you still get to be
Yes.
there
Yeah.
engaged.
Yeah, you get, and then you get to, interact with the faculty. So luckily there was a graduate assistantship for me, on a research team with my advisor. And I don't think I realized how influential that experience was, because I was the only master's student on this team. Everyone else were doc students at the time. And they really took me in. And I think that's really kind of like what helped me make that decision. They make the decision easier for me to choose to pursue the PhD, because I saw how they were engaging in research, and I was able to do the same thing, like learn alongside them. Right? They never treated me like I was behind them in a sense or whatever. Right? Like they included me in that space, and so I think that that's maybe where I started, that's where I kind of really grew a passion for research and what it could do and the impact it could have, right? Because then I saw in my own program that there was this real lack of research or literature on Native students, and in particular in higher education, right? That was where my passion really lied, was higher education. There's a big difference between that K-12 space and higher education, right? So that's what I'm trained in, is in higher education. That's my passion. And I saw very minimal literature. And I would talk to my advisor and my faculty about that. I'd say, I'd really like to see more. And they were like, yeah, we would include more if we knew that there was more literature out there.
Right.
Like in my classes or whatever, right? And so I was like, okay, so this is definitely a huge gap,
right?
And this is something that I could actually make an impact in,
right? So before we even get to the PhD, because that is a whole process within itself, so maybe tell the listeners, how long did it take for you to obtain your bachelor's degree? How long did it take for you to get your master's degree? And then kind of what factors played into you, okay, I'm going to do this PhD. I'm not sure what it is, but however, this is what made me decide that this is why I'm doing it. This is why I'm going to go ahead and, move forward and apply. And, why was this program? So maybe just share how long that took.
Yeah. So, coming out of high school, we went to Calumet High School, which was a really small country school, right? And I knew from the beginning that I was not prepared to matriculate to a large institution, right? And so I chose to start at Redlands for my first year. I thought I would just get my associates there, honestly. But then, after that first year, realized that I was ready to transfer. So after that, I transferred to OU, and then I did 4 years at OU.
Okay.
So I took 5 years to get my bachelor's degree. And then I went straight into the master's, and that was a 2-year program. Okay. The master's program is very highly structured.
Yes.
And so, you move right along. And then I took a year off, and I worked on campus at the University of Arizona in between my master's and the PhD. So then the following fall, I guess, a whole year after completing my my master's is when I started the PhD. And that took me 7 years to finish the PhD. So, coursework, I flew through coursework.
Right.
I was a full-time student, which meant that because I didn't work full-time, I took 3 classes each semester, so 9 credits. Full-time can also be 6 credits.
Right.
If you have like a half-time GA ship or something like that, right? But I mean, but for my scholarship, I had to be at 9 credits. That was their criteria, their policy. So I flew through coursework because I'd already had the master's in higher education as well. So all of those credits transferred in.
Right. Yes.
And then from there, when going through coursework is very highly structured as well, right?
Yes.
Like, that you have to take these classes, and you kind of the whole.
You've got deadlines.
Yeah. How it all rolls out throughout the semester.
You have to answer to a professor.
Yes. Then when you finish your coursework,
Which usually takes a lot. Like how many years would you say for coursework?
So I did 2 years my master's. It's anywhere from 3 to 4 years of coursework. If and that really depends upon like
Your
how many
full-time,
credits you
part-time.
take.
Yes.
Yeah. If you're taking summer credit or summer courses, all of that stuff. So typically, though, I would say it's like 3 years, maybe
and
4.
So that's step one in
Yes.
the PhD program, right? You take all your coursework, you're done, and then tell us what was next.
And then after that, you typically have to pass some sort of like exam, oral, either written and or oral exam, right? To kind of, show your understanding and quote unquote expertise in the literature, right?
Yes.
And the theories. And then after that, you prepare a proposal or a prospectus, whatever term your program uses.
Yes.
But it's a document that is like the beginning of your dissertation, which could include either the full chapters or like a draft of your first 3 chapters, which are typically your introduction, your literature review, and your methodology. And so, you prepare that document, and you've also assembled at that point in time, you've assembled your committee. And so your committee is made up of your advisor or your chair. And then it's either 2 or 3 or 4 other faculty, either within your program or your department. And typically one who's like an outside member who is there to just make sure that like processes and procedures are followed.
Right.
And you're like your representative in that space, right? Your advocate. But that's somebody that you can choose too, that maybe is not in your program or your department or college, that you've, been able to build a relationship with, right? And so you've assembled your committee, and then they're the ones that first of all, you work with your advisor to prepare this document, not intensely work with them, but you go and you do the writing, they review it, they provide feedback, you go back and you revise, you submit it to them. So it goes back and forth in that kind of like revisions kind of, work. But they're the ones that are guiding the development of this proposal or prospectus. And then once they basically give the okay.
And how long would you say, what is that? How long does that take, that process of doing your proposal or taking your exams and prospectus?
Yeah.
All of that. What does that timeline look like, and how long could that take someone to do?
Yeah. So typically, I would say not typically. It depends on your program, right? If your program has worked in a course that prepares you, that helps you prepare your proposal. So that's what I had in my program, was that I had a research design class that I took at my very final semester of coursework. Took that class, and the instructor, my faculty member, walked us through kind of like how we build out this proposal, right? And also kind of helped in that space too, like really helped us hone in on exactly what was our topic, what was our research question or questions,
right?
And how was like basically, making sure that every little piece kind of created this like through line of your research, right? So your theoretical or conceptual framework that you're using as your lens, your methodology. So how are you actually going about, collecting your data, recruiting your participants, if you're doing qualitative work, or, what kind of data set are you looking at if you're a quantitative, if you're going the quantitative route. So, like those things, and like making sure that, even like your data collection process is aimed at answering your research question.
Yes.
Right.
Okay. Hold on.
Okay.
Because you threw a lot of big words out there,
which
is methodology, theoretical, conceptual framework, which we could go into more detail, but just maybe Google it if you don't know what those things are, because it takes a lot to explain, but it's very particular to this process. So that's, would you say, step 2 in this process, step 2 and 3, and
Yeah. I mean, so you take that either research design or that prospectus class, whatever
Yes.
it's called, right? You go through that process, but even then, it's you still have to check in with your advisor to make sure that they feel like your proposal or your prospectus is like ready to go, right?
But all this is mainly dependent on you, correct?
It
Because
is.
this is no longer a class. This is you sitting down to write the time or time management and saying, okay, this is how much I need to, allocate this day to just sit here and write and do research. So, I mean, how hard is that to do?
Well, it really depends.
Or is it easy?
I think when we think of like doctoral students today, and the reality of higher education right now, there are very few students who are full-time students that do not carry full-time jobs, right? So
Correct.
these are mainly working professionals who are working full-time jobs, may have families, right?
Yes.
Have a lot more demands outside of this focus on their research, on developing their research.
Right.
And so, it really is dependent upon, how much time and energy they have to dedicate to it.
Right.
Right.
So there's no right or wrong answer
No.
here. It just all dependent on you. That don't put any unrealistic expectations on yourself.
Yes, I think that's the difference. That's something that I had to figure out as I was going through this whole process, because academia will kind of make you start believing that like there's just like this, it's a very step-by-step process, right? And it's very linear, and it's not, right?
Yes.
But I had that kind of ingrained in me,
Right.
and it wasn't like in a bad way, right? It wasn't like my faculty were like, you have to get done by this point in time, or like, this is what we expect of our students. Like they weren't like that, but their view, their thinking around it was, well, yes, it's very linear, and it's very just this, you do this, you do this, you do this, and then you're done, right?
Right.
And that's not really the typical student's experience.
Right.
Unfortunately.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
And I think that's where maybe there's tension between that understanding, right? Because again, I know my faculty weren't, their messaging was not in a harmful way, but the way that I like took it in, right, really had an impact on me, and on the stress that I carried around that piece of the journey,
Right.
because I thought that I was the only one that wasn't following,
Yes.
along the route.
Step.
Yeah.
Yes. Right. So I do want to say, okay, we've got past that step, and you've proposed and you've defended your proposal. Your committee approved it, and then what step is next? And I really want you to talk about maybe the not so good parts of that, because Natalie and I, we both at some point in time after our educational journeys have moved back home to El Reno, and we, stayed in contact and would visit when we'd see each other. So I remember you coming back home at some point and needing a break. So you might, if you can just share what that process and journey was like for you, good or bad.
Yeah. Once you get past the kind of like the defense, the quote unquote defense. I'm not a big fan of that word or that term, but you have to basically get the okay from your committee to be able to move forward, and really start your research journey. And the next step from the proposal, from that getting the approval, is the IRB application, which is the Institutional Review Board, that you submit an application to, and they review it to make sure that your research is in line with human subjects, protocols, and things like that. So it's to protect your potential participants, but also to protect the institution as well.
Right.
Yes. So that's a whole nother topic too.
Yes.
But then after you get IRB approval, then you move forward and you start collecting your data. You start actually engaging in your research topic. And that's like where you're like free to roam on your own, basically.
Right.
And so, for me, like I was talking about, with my journey, I felt like because of the program that I came out of, like it really was kind of like this, this messaging around this like linear thinking of, these are how our students go through the program. And I will say that, I did see like a couple of students who actually kind of followed, right, that. So there were examples, right? But then there were examples of other students who didn't. And I had an experience at that time where I feel like, I've been able to process it. It's been many years since then, right?
Yes.
So, but, I had this, I feel like, just maybe like an unfortunate experience that really caused a lot of stress on me.
Right.
And at the time, I was still living in Tucson. I still had my family up in the Mesa, Scottsdale area, but my immediate family, who had been living out there for a few years, moved back to Oklahoma. And so, I felt at that time like alone because I felt like, well, I'm only really here because I'm trying to get this dissertation done. And I feel like I've hit a wall and I'm not sure. And I honestly, at the time, I really didn't know how to work through it. I couldn't figure it out. And so I just, I really didn't know what to do. But I carried a lot of pride and, was like very stubborn and like, no, I'm going to figure this out. I'm going to do this, and it was real hard for me to ask for help and especially, and even with my own family. And so I remember, talking to my parents and, really struggling. And then all of a sudden, in this one conversation with my dad, he just said, you know what? He was like, just come home. And I broke. In that moment, I broke down. And I said, okay. And that was it. That's all I needed to hear because, what I do and what's driven me all of this time is it's related to my family, right? I love my family. And I'm thankful to be a part of them, right? My parents, did the best they could. They've always supported me. And then not just my parents, but, my extended family, my aunts, my uncles, my grandmas, they all supported me. And so I felt like I couldn't let them know that I was struggling so much. Right. But just to hear my dad say that, he was like, just come home, just pack up your car with whatever you need right now. Don't worry about anything else and just come home.
Right.
Right. And so that's what I did. That's exactly what I did. I let my faculty know. And I remember telling my advisor about it. I was like, I just need a break. I've been going for so long and I just feel lost right now, And so she was so supportive though. She was like, okay. She was like, yeah, that's fine. Like, if that's what you need, yes, go home, get rejuvenated, get replenished, do what you need to do. And then let me know whenever you're ready to start back up again. Right.
Right.
So that's when I came home and it was like, I think it might have been in February, or maybe January, something like that. And I was home, and I was home for the whole like spring semester, basically. Right. And I didn't touch my dissertation. I didn't even think about it. I just was in the community and I was able to, really like get back into, those friendships and relationships that I had, cultivated over time.
Right.
Cause I missed that. That was something I think that like, I felt like, was part of it was I just felt like I didn't have a community out there, right? Like my community.
Yes.
And so, it took that time. And then all of a sudden, just as I started thinking about, okay, what's my next step? I think I might just have to try to find a job and then try to figure out like when I can start back working on this dissertation. And then a good friend of mine reached out and said, and asked me like, well, how are you doing? What does it look like for you right now? And I was, and it was so crazy. Let me tell you the story. So like, I literally, that day that I remember I made that decision, I was like, okay, I got to figure out what I'm doing next. Like I've had my time, played around, had fun. Now I got to figure it out. And I went to lunch with a good friend of mine, and I was telling him about that, right? I was like, okay, so this is what I've decided, and I'm going to have to start looking for a job. And so, if you know of anything, or if you hear anything, like, send it my way, whatever. We had that lunch. I was driving home, and that's when my friend called me and was like, hey, just wanted to check in with you and see how you're doing, and I was like, well, I just decided, and so I started telling her. She was like, well, that's real interesting because I have, where I'm working right now, there's this pre-doctoral fellowship that I think you would be perfect for. And I was like, you've got to be kidding me. I was like, I just made this decision, right?
Right.
So she sent me the information, I applied, and I got it. So it just worked out.
Right.
And then on top of it, it was, even funnier for me because like I remember contacting my advisor after that and letting her know that I was like getting this pre-doctoral fellowship and I was going to be moving over to this institution. And she was like, oh my goodness, I was so nervous. I didn't think that you were going to come back. And I was like, wait, you were so supportive.
You told me to go home.
I was like, how, what, and she was like, I know, but in back of my mind, I really was wondering like if you were going to return. And I was like, no, I said, I've dedicated too much of my life and my time to the pursuit of finishing this. Like there's no way I'm not completing this degree. Right.
Yes.
I'm stubborn. Don't give up very easily. Right.
Right. So then, and you might tell them where you moved to for that opportunity because it wasn't here in Oklahoma or Arizona. So tell them where you moved.
It was it was at South Dakota State University, a place that I was not even on my map at all. Yeah.
At all.
And it was up in Brookings, South Dakota. So first time up in Brookings.
Right.
Not my first time in South Dakota, but I think maybe my first time like on that side of the state because it was like on the very eastern side of the state, which was actually really cool because my mom is from Fort Peck, right? We're Assiniboine and we're Dakota, and from that lineage, my mom has done, researched her, her lineage and all that stuff, and so we're Sisseton Wahpeton band.
Okay.
And she was saying that like, we, she draws our kind of like our roots back to that like Eastern South Dakota, Minnesota area. So that was really cool because I was like, well, then I actually was able to kind of have that experience being in that land, right? Being there.
Right.
And Brookings is like a little like hidden oasis. I feel like, honestly, like it was a really, really nice town to live in. The campus was really pretty. I'm not a northern girl though. Oh my goodness. Like those winters were crazy.
I can even imagine.
So I was like, no, my mom's a northern girl. I'm not. Like, I can't. But I was like, well, I'm fine with it because I'm there for 2 years.
Yeah.
Right. I can do 2 years. I can have this experience and then I can move on.
Right. And I feel like that's sometimes how things happen. I don't want to be that native, but like just things always happen the way that they're supposed to. And I hate to, sometimes you're in situations you're like, oh man, that's just really meant to be. And it's really meant to happen this way. And we put things out. Like you said, I just said, oh, I'm going to go back and start, and you get this opportunity. But that also goes back to your network and people that know you and mentor you and looking out for you. So that exists beyond your community too, up here in Concho or El Reno, Oklahoma. But so now we're back into the dissertation. So now how long did that take you to finish?
Yeah, from the time that I started, I think it took me 3 years. So, and 3 years, like I was actively working on it, but it was my topic and my like study population, my participants that I was looking for that were really difficult to track down because I chose, so being an American Indian Gates Millennium Scholar, right? Like going through that experience and being a part of that network, the rhetoric around that was like, you're like the cream of the crop, whatever, you're the top of the top, right? Like these Gates scholars, not just American Indian, but Gates scholars overall, were these very high achieving students. There was these expectations of them, right? And the American Indian Gates Millennium Scholars, I felt like were really celebrated, you know, which I really love to see, and how they were announced every year, where they were from, their tribal communities they were representing, and where they were going to, right? And so, you know, I remember that when I would come home from Arizona, leading up to my dissertation, or leading up to that research design class that I took, I didn't quite, so I knew I wanted to do research in American Indian students in higher education, right? Like, but I didn't really know my topic area. And I remember I thought I knew my topic area, and I took it to my advisor, and I was like so excited, and I was like, okay, I'm ready to, like, you know, tell her. And so, you know, we have this conversation, and I tell her, and she's like, okay, you know, that's a good start. Think about it, you know? So I was like, okay, never mind. I guess I don't know what I want to do. So I was like, crap, let me scrap that. But then at around the same time, I think I had come home, and people were telling me about this student from one of our tribal communities that, you know, received the scholarship too. And they were also proud of this student because, you know, they just, you know, they were high achieving, you know, had, you know, carrying a lot of potential with them. And then, you know, fast forward a little bit later on, come to find out that this individual did not continue past their first year. And people from our communities were like, they told me that. They like informed me about it, and I was like, what happened? Right. And it really kind of plagued me. Honestly, I remember like having these deep thoughts around it, like what could have happened, you know, because, you know, my experience, I feel like I had a very like positive experience. There was a lot of, you know, Native or a lot of American Indian Gates Millennium Scholars at OU at the same time, right? And so we kind of had our own little network. But then as I had thought about it a little bit more, I identified a few of them from OU that also kind of fell into that space too. So then I kept thinking about it. And then I remember having a conversation with my advisor about it. And she was like, well, can you answer that question? Like, what happened? What was their experience? Like, what led them away? I said, no, I can't. And she was like, well, then you should research that.
Right.
And so it was like, oh, that could be my topic. You know, like I had no clue. I really thought it was just something that like I was plagued with or whatever. Right.
Like just personally. And that was it. Yes.
And so that was it. Right. So I was like on this mission to find these former American Indian Gates Millennium Scholars who went to college, you know, and left at some point in time.
Right.
And so they were like back in their tribal communities or just, you know, wherever, right? They weren't on these college campuses and easily accessible. Yes. Right. So, and, you know, and coming from my program, you know, every program's different. Like I'm a qualitative scholar. So I do interviews. I interact directly, right, with participants. Yes. And, you know, every program has its own standards. My program, their expectation around qualitative work was still like a very high number of participants. Initially, I was told that I needed to interview 30. And I was like, okay.
No, that's a lot.
Yeah. I was
that's
like, all right, I'll try, you know? And so I started out with that number and I was like, I don't know, this may just, you know, this may be impossible. And so as I went about looking for these participants, I had more conversations with my advisor and I got her to understand that like asking for 30 in a pool of, you know, of scholarship recipients, who were Alaskan Native American or Alaskan Native, whatever, out of that whole 20,000, there was like, I think a little over 2,200, right? Okay. That would be in that pool of receiving the scholarship. And then it was unknown how many of them actually didn't persist towards graduation, right? So I was like, so I don't know how many of them, like if I could say a percentage or whatever, right? But then you're asking me to find 30 of them. You know, I think it might be feasible to be able to find 20. Yes. And she was like, okay, 20. So I just had to negotiate basically, right? Yes. So that's something that like I think I figured out along the way that I didn't quite know that I could do
Mm-hmm.
was like advocate for myself in that way, and
Right.
then like have those conversations to negotiate.
Mm-hmm.
But you know, to kind of bring that understanding of like I'm not like pulling from a pool of like 10,000 students over here,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like it's not like they're, you know, the numbers
Yes.
on a line in a
Yes.
sense, right?
Right.
So she didn't, you know, need any more justification. She just said, okay, 20,
Mm-hmm.
right? So then I was like, oh, now I gotta find 20. Okay. And I remember I got to like, I think I got to like 12 or 13. And then I just like, and I hit another wall. I think like maybe 3 or 4 months went by and I didn't identify anyone. And I
Mm-hmm.
was like tapping into all of my like informal networks.
Mm-hmm.
I was using social media. You know, I was doing everything that I thought I could,
Right.
to find these individuals. And then an administrator, actually, I think he was a dean at South Dakota State University, who was, I think he was the one who was administering the fellowship that I had, and I had to check in with him, and I wasn't able to offer any sort of like monetary compensation for my participants up until then because I didn't have the funding, right? And so, you know, we had a conversation and asking me how it was going, and I told him, I was like, you know, I'm not sure. I'm kind of at a bit of a roadblock right now because I'm not finding participants, and I'm trying to decide, like, if I go and tell my advisor this, I know that's going to change my dissertation and
Right.
change it altogether, right? Like, if I have to open it up to other scholarship recipients, that really changes my topic
Yes.
fully. And I don't really want to do that. You know, I want to see this through. And he asked me, he was like, well, you know, what is it we can help you with? And I was like, I don't really know, you know, and we started talking, and he was like, well, are you able to offer any kind of monetary compensation? And I was like, no, I don't have that. And he was like, well, do you think that would make an impact? And I was like, I don't know, maybe, I'm not sure, you know? And so he was like, well, what if we, you know, how many do you need? How many do you have left? And I was like, I think I have like 7 or 8. And he was like, what if we can offer them like $100 a piece? And I was like, well, I don't know if 100 is necessary. You know, I was like, well, that's a lot, right? But then I was like, maybe, so can I negotiate this? I was like, I was like a negotiator. And I was like, you know, I didn't get to offer any kind of compensation for all of my participants that have already,
Yes.
you know, participated. Can I offer them and the future participants $50? And he was like, done. And that was it.
And why do you think that was important to pay people for their time or for their stories and
You know,
experiences?
Yeah, it's just because, you know, people are offering their time.
Yes.
Right.
Right.
And I think that's something that, you know, as native people, we don't see it that way, right?
Yes.
We don't see it as like, I need to be compensated if I'm going to spend time interacting with you.
Right.
Right.
Like I'm helping you.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. You know, but it doesn't hurt, I guess. Right. Like if you know, if you're on that, I feel like that's what it was. Like, it was like, if, you know, I think for many of them, because they didn't know me personally either. Right.
Yes.
Like I'm asking them to share their experience and a not so great experience with me. Right.
Yes.
And they don't know me. So can they trust me with their story? And
That's a big factor.
right. And, you know, and there's a little bit of compensation on the side. Like that helps out.
Yes.
That buys a meal or two, that pays for gas.
Yes.
Right.
Which I'm sorry we were not able to compensate you today, but maybe I can get you a coffee or a sweatshirt or something. Okay, moving on.
Well, I'll always take a sweatshirt. So, you know, so I was able to like add that in.
Yes.
And I was able to find the rest of my participants in, I would say, I mean, it still took like a couple months, but they came through. Right. And, so I was able to get, you know, my 20 participants, meet them, learn about, you know, their experience, hear their story. And I still carry that. I still carry those stories with me to this day.
Right. Which I find is, you might tell them your topic of your dissertation is so fascinating about her study is that Which I would say Western education would say that is a failure because you dropped out or you didn't finish or you didn't graduate, right? But that's not necessarily how you defined your findings in your
Yeah.
research. And maybe failure sometimes is a good thing. It's not always bad to fail at things, but maybe explain your findings and why you think they were significant. And after interviewing them, sometimes it's not the people, sometimes it may be the system that we're up against. So go ahead.
Yeah. So when I, decided that I wanted to pursue this topic, I wanted to flip that perspective from a very deficit lens on the individual student.
Yes.
Right. That when a student is not successful in college, it's because of them, or it leads back to, well, they weren't prepared. They didn't get integrated into the campus, like all of these things, right? And there was so much literature by non-native scholars talking about native students in this very deficit way, right? And so that was something that I bristled against. And so I was like, okay, so I know the literature. I know enough of it to be able to say that for any student, when you account for academic preparation coming out of high school, right, and for financial aid, or for the ability to pay for college, when you account for those two factors, any student is expected to be successful, right? Those are the two main factors for any student when they're pursuing higher education.
Yes.
Right. So the scholarship accounted for academic preparation because, in their application, you had to prove that, you were, you had this academic prowess, right? Coming out of high school, you participated in either AP classes, or you took, concurrent classes, or whatever, your grades, your GPA, all of that stuff. And then the academic, or the funding, right? Then the scholarship was, it paid for the cost of attendance for any institution that you chose to attend, right? So your cost of attendance, not just your tuition and your fees, but your full cost of attendance was covered, right? So by counting for those two factors, the American Indian Gates Millennium Scholars, and any scholar at that, for that matter, right, should have pursued and persisted to graduation, right? And so in my mind, it was okay, so, with these students bringing those two factors, accounting for those two factors, what was it about their experience within these institutions that either pushed them out or caused them to leave, right? And along the way, as I was having conversations, this whole concept of push and pull factors, being pushed out from within the institution, and then factors that pull you out, right? So factors outside of the institution pulling you out, kind of came in. So that was a part of my dissertation, was kind of talking about those things, because, what I found, my whole goal was to really flip the script and put some responsibility on the institution and these institutional agents, we'll call them, right, within, that there's a responsibility to serve these Native students. And from what I found, that these Native students had these negative experiences on their campus, right? They went to many different institutions, so it wasn't just one, right?
Right.
But at their respective campuses and their respective institutions, they had these real negative experiences, right? And that they didn't feel fully supported in these spaces, so they're coming in and they're expecting, right? They're looking forward to a good experience. They're looking to get connected. They're looking to, to just continue on, right? But for whatever reason, they had these experiences that made them feel like they either didn't belong or that they didn't have anyone to turn to.
Yes.
Right. And then, then there was these other factors on the outside too. So again, counting for those pull factors that, that society today would make us think that, oh, well, those things are kind of our fault in a sense, right? Like, Native students need to be able to break off from their families, and become individuals, right? And so, what I found was that, there were these participants of mine, they carried traditional roles. They carried elective roles within their tribal communities, right? And then their familial responsibilities, right? Number of them were the oldest in their families, right? And they felt that responsibility to continue to help their younger siblings like navigate, their journeys as well, right? That was a huge responsibility that they carried with them, right? So the idea around like, these students just going off to college and becoming their own, and like not looking back or not turning back and not, whatever, like that doesn't work.
Yes.
That does not work for Native students, right?
Right.
And so that was something that like, I talked about, in that, when we think of how Native students can be fully served within that higher education space, there has to be some accounting for their families, right? Like when they're connected, when they remain connected back to their communities in some way, or a community even, right? I found one of the participants of mine talked about, where she went to school, and that she didn't actively really pursue or get integrated to campus. She actually connected with a tribal community within, that was close, and she, formed relationships there, right? That was something that was important to her,
right?
Because they supported her, right? So, I mean, I think, I'm again, like your dissertation is like the very first study that you do as a, that kind of sets your path in that scholarly space. So there are definitely things that I think that I would probably do differently, right, if I were to approach that topic again. But, as it is right now, my whole point of it was really to kind of like put that emphasis on the institution. And some of those, like, again, institutional agents within that, these students had direct contact with, and they voiced that, they didn't receive the support that they needed at that time, right? To be able to, that they felt like they could continue.
Yes.
Right. But then also I wanted to reframe that, thinking around like departure, quote unquote, departure from higher education, that when Native students leave, they just leave and they don't ever come back. Right. When what happened, and this was my own, I don't know, shortness of thinking around this topic, but I was surprised to find out that I think 9 of my 20 students or participants had returned back to higher education at the time that I interviewed them, and that all but one had expressed the interest in continuing, right, in continuing in higher education. The loss of the scholarship impacted the institution that they returned to, though, right? They did not return back to their initial institution.
Okay.
They returned back to either tribal or community colleges, and then some of them went to tribal colleges, which is really, really is interesting to me. And that, they really kind of talked about those differences from their experience within their tribal college to that initial experience at a mainstream white institution.
Yes.
And how they found what they were looking for, that the type of support and community they needed within that tribal college, more so than that mainstream institution.
That's awesome. I mean, incredible work. And now you've completed the dissertation. You defend that dissertation as well to your committee again. And then now that you've graduated, now you're a whole doctor, you've got a whole PhD. And now I also want you to share like the awesome work that you get to do now and the role that you have of being an advisor, being that mentor for these, Indigenous scholars that are coming up, and the classes that you get to teach and the program that you all are building at OU. I think y'all are doing a lot of exciting stuff. So tribal colleges, you're the editor of that research journal. And I mean, just talk about all the awesome things now that you get to do, because what I've been told by my advisor, mentor, is that, the topic, when you're trying to pick a topic for a dissertation or your research interest, it's like you're in a candy store because there's so many topics, right, that you could do. There's so many broad things. You're like, oh, that's important. That's important. And she said, like, like in a candy store, get one piece of candy, focus on that piece of candy. Then after you graduate, then you can have all the candy that you want and research and write about all of these things that you think are important. So now tell us about what you get to do now that you're a whole doctor.
Oh my goodness. Well, when I pursued the PhD, I did not plan to go into the professoriate, right? Like that was not something that drove me. That was like motivational, I guess, right? Because I felt like, academia is weird. And I tell people that all the time. Like academia is just weird, right? Like, I mean, I'm still, learning how to maneuver within it, right? And I say that, I mean, it's a little bit like cheeky, I guess, to describe it in that way. But really what it is that, academia will change you, right? It will change you in good and bad ways, right? And I saw that play out throughout my master's and throughout my PhD, and I was observant with it, right? And growing up in our tribal community, and growing up with with my grandma, with the grandmas that I had and my aunties and uncles, that's my security, right? That was my sense of security. And I didn't know how to be anyone different, right? And I didn't want to be anyone different from what my family and my community, who they saw me as, right? And so, I really, I don't know if that was not so much like a point of struggle, but I just knew that I would never give myself up or fully just dive into academia because I couldn't do it. It didn't represent me. It didn't make me whole, right? It was a part of me.
Right.
But I wasn't willing to give it my full identity. And I never will. So I think I learned to kind of tread lightly in that space, right? And kind of, just continue to be observant, I guess. And so, so then I was like, I don't know if I really see myself in that space as a faculty member, right? But I just know that with a PhD, I can do a lot of good.
Yes. Absolutely.
Right.
Yes.
So I went the nonprofit route first, right? And I was an administrator for a few years, and I really fell in love with that work. And it was working with tribal colleges and was working with faculty. And I really, really enjoyed it. And then this position came up, and I didn't expect it.
You weren't planning on it or planning for it.
No.
Yes.
But it was pretty much like the perfect kind of faculty role or faculty position that I could ever think of, because it focused on Indigenous higher education. And that was my research agenda, right? Was focusing on elements or aspects of Indigenous higher education, right? So I wasn't going to apply, and then all of a sudden I was encouraged to apply. So I was like, okay, sure. And I went about it thinking that I had no expectations for it, right? I was like, I'm going to apply and I'm going to go through this experience and put it in the back of my back pocket, and because I'm not really looking, right? And then I was offered the position, and then I had to make that difficult decision. Do I leave this work that I love doing and that I'm really good at? I know my job here, right? I know what I need to do. And there was these exciting potential opportunities that were coming down the pipeline that I was excited about, right? So the work was not monotonous in any way. But then I was like, but it is, and it's not that it's OU, but it's within a campus environment that I'm familiar with, and that it allows me to be closer to my tribal community. And I didn't know, going down this route of education, I didn't know if I'd be able to work my way back towards our tribal community, right? Because I knew that it was kind of putting me on the outside in a sense, right? There's really we don't have the tribal college anymore.
Yes.
And that's kind of where I think, when it was around, I was like, oh, I could see myself working there. I would love to be able to work there. Right.
Yes.
So anyways, so, I made the decision to come to, take a leap, and it's a tenure track position. So that meant that coming in, I had a clock, they call it like a time clock, whatever, of so many years to basically prove myself and prove my academic worth, I guess, or scholarly, I don't know, prowess, whatever.
And how do you do that? Tell people how you prove your academic worth.
Oh my goodness. I mean, because OU is, a research one institution, which is like, where, basically like they focus on research, right? There is a huge focus on research. More so than like teaching and service, right? There are three main areas of a faculty's work, right? Of a tenure or tenure track faculty's work. It's teaching, research, and service, right? TRS. But the research really does kind of weigh heavier or account for more than the teaching and the service. So, so again, like every program has their own criteria of like what they expect a tenure track faculty member to achieve within that certain time that we have, right? You submit, like I do like annual evaluations every year, right? Where I kind of get to list off like all the things that I participated in, that I did throughout the year, in those spaces, teaching, research, and service, and then kind of like justify, why it was important for me to engage in that way, like how did it impact my scholarly development, that kind of thing. And then after 5 or 6 years, basically, typically, I guess, you submit all of that to your program, to your department, and it's reviewed by the faculty, and also there's outside reviewers too that review and provide their insight or recommendations or whatever. And then it just goes up the chain, all the way up to the provost and to the president. Like if it's a go, if it's a yes along the way, you get all yeses, out of that whole review process, then you're tenured, and that is job security, basically. What it amounts to is it's job security. That you I don't know, are never like you, I don't know, that you have that position until you want to move on or whatever, right?
Okay. Yes.
And so it's kind of it feels like high stakes in a sense, right? That it's like, wow, I just need to like grind in this time frame to make sure that I have a guaranteed position for the rest of my life, basically, right?
Right.
That's like, in the simplest terms as possible. And I can't think that way. Like I just can't, because that causes a lot of stress, right? To be like, okay, I just need to grind for like these many years, right? Like, what does that mean? Right. And there's research, and there are a plethora of stories out there that, where it's had a really negative impact on faculty, in particular faculty of color, that, it's impacted them, their livelihoods. Right.
Yes.
And I was like, I can't do that.
Right.
I'm not going to do that. Like, I'm not going to let this just run my life.
Yes.
I'm going to do the work that I'm going to do. And at the end of the day, if they don't think it's good enough, then that's fine. It's not make or break for me.
Yes.
And so I just can't associate my worth with the institution or with academia.
Right.
Right. But, if I'm able to receive that tenure, then wonderful.
Yes.
Right. And that makes a huge assumption too, that like, I'm going to remain in that position for the rest of my career. Right. I mean, who knows what can come along in a sense,
You may
right?
move on.
But I will say that, I have felt fulfilled thus far, right, in this
Awesome.
position because, when I came in, there was this push for Indigenous education or Indigenous higher education initiatives. Really interesting how, like, the College of Education at OU has, they said they've had some, like, Indigenous faculty representation, but not enough, right?
Yes.
And I came in under the premise that we would have like three, right? We'd have three Indigenous faculty within our department. And at one point in time, we lost both of them. We lost the other two. There were three of us. And then we lost two of them in the same year. And that was like, that put a lot of students and myself somewhat into a spiral. Cause I was like, and I went to my dean. I remember telling her, I'm not fulfilled in this space if we can't bring in other Indigenous faculty because I didn't come here to be the only one.
Right. Yes.
And so, and then, just along the way, I think just because of, our presence there, we've had a steady number of Native students coming in, doctoral and master's level students coming into our program, that it's just been really wonderful to be able to work with them.
Right.
And, I'm an advisor for, 5 or 6 of them, I think, right now, including Brianna Ferris. And it's so fulfilling.
Right.
To work with them and to mentor them and to like be part of their scholarly development. So, yeah.
You're so fortunate and blessed to be in that position. And I know several people who are your students and you're their advisor. And like she has said, Brianna Ferris is one of her students, and Brianna is our higher ed director. Currently, she's a PhD student, PhD doctoral candidate, which I know you've kind of trying to nudge her along too. But, like this process, like she said, isn't linear, and there's no right or wrong way to do it. It just depends on you, your institution, sometimes your advisor, your support system. And so I know you guys are doing good things there at OU, and I'm excited for you and that you get to be close and we get to still work together. This has gone back to kindergarten. We grew up together. We're in different spaces, but sometimes we share the same space. So I do want to share that Natalie, I was contemplating about a PhD program for a long time, and we would have lunch and I would say, oh, I really want to apply. But I remember this specific time and I had told her, I really want to apply. I just don't think I'm smart enough. And she said, it's not about being smart. It's about being, do you have time management? Do you have persistence? Are you, willing to work hard? Are you, all these other things that you have to take into consideration. So after her saying that, and it gave me the confidence to say, okay, I'm real seriously going to look into a program. And so how she impacts other Indigenous scholars, Cheyenne Arapaho scholars, Brianna is her student. When I applied to a program, she told me specifically, look at the professors in that department. Do they have research interests that align with yours? Are there any Indigenous faculty members there? That makes a big difference. So when I was looking, that's two things that I looked for. So when I applied, Natalie also wrote me a recommendation letter for my program. So grateful for her and just being able, she truly is a mentor and helping other Cheyenne Arapaho students come along and understand this process. So even listening to you again, and I know we've talked, and it's just really motivating. And I hope people can see that you do, you've put in a lot of hard work over the years. And I hope that, it doesn't go unnoticed and unappreciated, because you're probably one of two right now that's going to be tenured, and we don't have a lot of tribal citizens that are pursuing this pathway, but here we have somebody that's able to share the process with us. And so I share, I thank you for your story. I thank you for your time. I thank you for sharing your experiences. I think it's important for people to hear. And something that I didn't get to do before, I was going to ask you this, so maybe if you could edit it to the beginning, but I want you to answer the question of like, tell me who you are, where you come from, about your family, so that people kind of know what community you come from, what,
Oh, yeah.
who your grandparents are and parents. We just jumped right in, so I'm sorry.
Yeah. So, my parents are John and Terry Youngbull. My dad is from here. His parents are John Tyler and Lucille. John Tyler Youngbull, Lucille Iris Hamilton Youngbull. So my grandpa is from Watonga, and then my grandma's from Hammond. And my mom is from Fort Peck, Montana, so she's Assiniboine and Sioux and Dakota, and draws her lineage from the Sisseton Wahpeton band. My family, I feel like I'm meeting family, new family members all the time. We have a very extended family, but from my grandma Lucille and her three sisters, Mary, Daisy, and Jessie May, all of my aunts and uncles from them, they all grew up really close. They consider each other brother and sister, my dad and his cousins. And then from there, like my grandma had 7 kids. 8. And my dad had 7 siblings. And my grandma had 30 grandchildren. So I have, about 30 first cousins,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
And I come from, a home that we had cousins, uncles, aunties staying with us all the time, right? I don't remember very many times where it was just our nuclear family. I guess you call them nuclear family. And so, I grew up just kind of immersed in this extended family atmosphere, and I loved it. And my grandma Lucille was probably the most influential person in my life. She's the strongest woman I have ever known. And she was my person. And so not a day goes by that I don't think of her. And she was very instrumental in my academic journey. She made sacrifices for me that I can never repay, but carry her spirit forward and her teachings, and always carry the fact that she was always so proud of me and that she believed in my journey. And that gives me peace at the end of the day.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. And thank you sharing about your family. And I know that a lot of times when we share things that mean the most to us, we always get emotional, which is okay. But I do want to share that Natalie, Brandon and I are still chugging along on this PhD process, but I do want to share that Natalie, Brand, and myself are at the beginning stages of writing research together and producing something that will be in a book, hopefully by next year. But we're all very busy, so we're trying to text each other and get writing times down. And we've submitted an abstract, and so I think that's something exciting that we get to do, right? That because of the positions that we're in, we get to write about things that we care about, and it'll be about women. So that's equally as exciting. So thank you guys for listening. Thank you, Natalie. I feel like you could come back and do a whole other podcast on other topics about CV building and presenting and all those things that you have to do for, proving your worth. But I just want to say that for the month of March, if you listen to our podcast and our content coming out of our department, it will focus on women within our department, tribal citizens in the realm of education. And I'll just be honest, I'm real biased because I love women and I love Indigenous women, and I love highlighting our stories and experiences. I think that they're important to hear, and especially in the field of education, because there are more women in the field. But I just think Indigenous women are the best, and there's nothing like them. And sharing stories of our mothers and our grandmothers, aunties, and our cousins, and that's what we always talk about. So Natalie and I have gone to Portland together and different places, Chicago, but, we're like, oh, that's my cousin, that we get to be in these spaces together, and I get to see her as a professor and when she gets to speak, and it's just awesome. I mean, so awesome to see that, when I have so many memories of us being at Darlington and sometimes fighting over food for lunch or just playing many basketball games together. We played basketball all our life till we graduated from high school together, going to Indian tournaments together. I mean, we shared a lot of memories. So I'm just grateful that we get to be here and in this space and share what we know now. So thank you. I appreciate your time.
No, thank you.
Go ahead.
It's so meaningful.
Yes.
I mean, it's not an everyday occurrence.
Right.
It's really not.
No.
Right. And we are the best, especially those of us that come from Concho.
Absolutely. And on that note, we'll end. So thank you for your time, and come back and listen again. Ha ho.